Hey everyone, Greg Cazillo from Cazillo.com. With me today is Eddie Murphy, Product Management in the Professional Imaging Team at Epson America. How are you doing today, Eddie?
I'm doing well. Thanks, Greg.
Well, thank you very much for agreeing to do an interview today. I have a bunch of questions, and thank you to everyone who submitted some questions. Let's just get right into it. Number one, how did Epson get into professional imaging and creating such awesome images so that we can just do everything ourselves at home?
Well, Epson actually started working with professional photographers about 14 or 15 years ago, ironically about when I started with the company. Our first archival printer was the Epson Stylus Photo 2000P, which was the very first pigment archival printer of any photo printer in the world. Ironically, the R2000 is a direct descendant of that. We actually worked out through the years. What we really did is we listened to the customer. We listened to professional photographers, and we also listened to the home photographer. So what we did is we took input and we said, hey, what do they need? And we found out what they needed, and we did our best to address those specific issues. Kind of the ultimate lead or result of that was the R2000. And it really is a great entry level or first professional digital printer for most users.
Okay. Now, talk to me a little bit about the inks. How's the difference in the inks way back when and the inks now? And you know what else I wanted to ask? You mentioned the word pigment. Tell me, let's start out there. Tell me about that term, pigment inks.
Pigment is really just, what it means is it's a solid particle of ink that's in a liquid suspension, in this case water, versus dye-based ink, which is basically colored water. So food coloring is an example of colored or dye-based ink.
Okay.
And if you took charcoal and mixed it up in water, ground up charcoal and mixed it up in water, it'd be black ink, but it would basically be a solid particle of ink that creates the color there. So pigment inks are a lot longer lasting, and in our case, we actually coat them with a special resin, which allows them to bond to each other and bond to the paper, which makes them a lot more light fast and a lot more water resistant. They're highly, highly water resistant.
Okay.
Going back to our original archival inks, which was in the 2000P, very long-lasting inks, but there are a couple of shortcomings, one of which it didn't do great black and white. We actually moved on, we progressed, we added another level of black, we did better with the 2200. Gave our customers individual ink cartridges because that was a big request.
Yeah.
We moved on, we actually got even better. We got 3 levels of black. We had switchable photo and matte black inks. We actually added better color pigments to the cartridges, and they got even better color and black and white output. Eventually, we moved on and we actually split the ink lines. So we had an ultrachrome high gloss ink, which dropped levels of black because we realized some people wanted to print really glossy prints, and some people wanted to print black and white prints. They're kind of different.
And that's actually, it's funny you say that because in the studio here, the 9890 is the one with the matte black ink, and then all the other machines are the ones with the photo black inks. And so the big stuff we're doing it as the matte, but converting that over does waste some ink, unfortunately, but it works out fine actually with the 2000 because you don't need to worry about that.
We actually call that auto-selecting matte black ink, matte black inks on the R2000, and they're auto-switching on the other printers. The great thing about that is since on the R2000 you have both matte black and photo black on board, the printer automatically selects the correct ink. Now, just continuing on with that is when we had the Ultrachrome High Gloss ink set, we had a unique ink called Gloss Optimizer, and since that's a pigment particle, just to kind of illustrate that for you, it sits on top of the page, and it's shinier than the actual paper. And what happens is when you print white, nothing gets printed, but when you print Gloss Optimizer, it basically acts as spackle, and it fills in the areas that don't need ink. So since the ink itself is glossy and only areas that you're not printing ink just get filled in, the Gloss Optimizer gives you a smooth, even glossy coat. Additionally, on the R2000, we actually evolved that. We took the red and the orange inks, which used to be red and blue, and we improved them. We also improved all the colors in general. So you get better color, and one thing I like to talk about is that on the R2000, you get a red ink. And most printers create red with magenta and yellow. So you're using 2 inks to create 1 color. On the R2000, you just use red, and you're actually getting a more genuine red at the same time. Orange helps out with skin tones, oranges obviously, and browns, because all brown is just dark orange. So we've really come a long way with the ink sets, and the R2000 with the Ultrachrome High Gloss 2 ink set is actually one of the longest lasting light fast and water resistant ink sets in our entire line.
Okay, you said light fast. So does that mean that I can just take that print, not put a glass in front of it, and hang it in the hallway that gets, you know, sun for half a day? Or what can I expect?
Well, there's one. You can. It will actually last for probably a couple of years like that, but I really wouldn't do that.
Okay.
One thing that I use an example for is I like to print on our canvases. And you don't put canvas behind glass. It's just silly.
Correct. Yeah.
So what you do is you print canvas, and then you have it open framed. Since these inks are so long lasting, you can probably expect anywhere from 1 or 2 generations, like 40 to 60 years of fade resistance in what we would say 8 hours of light a day in a normal, well-lit room. So if you were, for example, lighting it in a gallery, that would be where we would say 8 hours of gallery lighting a day for 40 to 70 years, which is a pretty big deal without glass.
It is. Yep. And now, as far as glass is concerned, would you just put a typical UV glass in front of it if you wanted to last longer?
Absolutely, absolutely. And then what we get for our light fastness ratings on something like our luster or our glossy paper is up to 100 plus years behind glass, getting that same kind of gallery lighting 8 hours a day.
Wow. That's definitely a long time to something that we probably won't see. we won't get to that time.
I always joke that we have a time machine.
Talk to me a little bit about the print heads. How does that work? I know that Canon has, I think it's Canon anyway, that has a warm head or a hot print head, and Epson likes the cold head. And tell me the difference. Why is one better than the other? Talk to me about that.
Well, it's actually it's not that one's warm or cold. The competitors use a thermal, which means they've got a little heating element.
Okay. And
it heats up, and it causes a bubble to form, because basically you're superheating the water in that ink, and it forces an ink droplet out. The advantage to this is, well, actually, sorry. This means that you've got to have a different size nozzle for every single droplet that you want to create. If you don't have a different size nozzle, it's because it's just superheating the ink. It's not going to be able to create a different size droplet. Our technology is actually based a little bit on watches.
Interesting.
So it's a piezo element, which if you've ever heard of quartz crystal, quartz crystal is piezo electric. If you apply an electric charge, it actually vibrates at a certain frequency. We've taken advantage of that. So we actually have a little plate above the nozzle, and we apply electric charge of a certain frequency or a certain microvoltage, and it flexes a certain amount. That creates a droplet that goes out at a certain size. So if you vary the voltage, you get larger or smaller droplets. Okay. So what we have what we call variable size droplet technology, which allows you to get multiple sizes of droplets out of a single nozzle. So when other competitors say, we have thousands and thousands of nozzles, I'm like, because they need them, because once a heating element heats up, it can't heat up again. It's got to cool down, and then you can heat it up again. Ours, we just simply vibrate the little plate, and it just drops out different size droplets. So
interesting.
Yeah, we're able to get fast prints with not a lot of nozzles. It's actually kind of nice. So that's our print head technology. That's the core of Epson's print head technology. It's called micro piezo, or some of the newer ones are called precision core, but those haven't made it down to the 13-inch printers yet. Okay,
so in other words, that's going to give me a print in a lesser amount of time. It's also going to give me a more accurate print and a nicer print, and the colors are going to be smoother because those droplets are different sizes. Is that basically what's going to...
I liken it to like we're able to paintball onto the page. So we actually specifically fire the droplets onto the page accurately. Okay. Versus a bubble forcing the droplet out.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, that makes sense. That makes sense. Speaking of heads, and the issue that I've heard a lot of people talk about is clogging. I've heard a lot of people talk about it and issues, and I mean everybody's had this problem with their inkjet printer. You know, the heads clog up, and you have problems with it. What's the number one? What's the best way to keep it from clogging in the first place?
So, well, the best way to keep it from clogging in the first place is we actually. So, I'm going to take a little side note. We have a video that actually covers the best ways to maintain your printer on our website.
I'll definitely link to that.
Yeah, www.epson.com/support/R2000. It's under the videos, and it's the general printer care, I think.
Okay.
So the first thing you can do is when you're not using the printer, if you don't use your printer frequently, if you don't use it every 2 days or so, turn it off when you're not using it. This caps the print head, it sends it to a home position, and there's a little rubber seal that goes around the print head. And what happens is it keeps it moist and it keeps the print head or the nozzles from drying out. Number two, when you're not using, also close up the printer. If you're not going to use it for more than a week, close it up and then please cover it. Cover it. Keep dust from getting inside. It's just like all your other electronic components, you know? Dust isn't helpful for it. Next, you can actually, oh yes, if you do use your printer a lot and you're still finding that, you know, occasionally you'll get nozzle clogs and you're like, well, what's the deal? I did what Eddie said. I covered it up. I turned it off when I'm not using it. Take a warm cloth, a warm, damp cloth, and actually the paper feed tray, just clean that out, and you'll be amazed at all the dust and paper dust that you actually pull out of there. I have done it multiple times, and it is amazing how much crap you'll pull out of there. Paper itself is dusty, and what happens is it all accumulates in there. It's just like, you know, your shredder. When you shred paper, a lot of paper dust happens. Same thing happens when paper gets milled and cut. So that paper ends up in your paper feed tray. And the only place it can end up after that is each paper can draw that into your printer mechanism, and the print head, it will actually pick it up.
Can you use a can of air to blow that out too? Would that be okay?
I wouldn't use a can of air unless the printer was turned off. The warm damp cloth is probably the best way to go about it. Okay. But you might want to just wipe off all the surfaces of your printer while you're at it too. So, yeah.
Okay, so we're talking in the sheet feeder in the back of the printer, with like with the 2000, you have the cover that folds down. Do you leave that folded down, and then where that sheet feeder is? Okay. Yeah,
exactly. When you're not using the printer, take paper out, because what happens is a lot of people leave paper in their printer because they're like, oh, I want to be ready to print. Well, dust will fall on that paper. It'll get fed into the printer. The print head will pick it up because there's a little bit of moisture with that print head. It'll suck it up, and that can cause a clog.
Wow. Okay.
So it's one of those things where it's unless, and I do this all the time at trade shows, so I tell people X, Y, and Z, and they're like, well, that's it? And I'm like, yeah. Understand that, you know, you'll still probably get dust going through there, and it'll still probably occasionally clog. But the R2000 is probably one of the best printers. It actually has an ink repellent coating on the print head, which allows it doesn't allow ink to kind of gather around the nozzles and dry up. So it's actually a really neat function. We've tried to make users aware of the best ways to keep their printer running smoothly, because we want them to print as much as you guys do. So.
Yep. Yeah, we definitely print a lot. Our machines are here in the studio. As I was saying in our other videos, we have, I think, 5 or 6 Epson machines, from the little what did I say it was, XP420? Is that the little 8x10 sheet feeder?
410, yeah.
Yeah, and then all the way up to the 9890 44-inch machine. Any plans to make a bigger machine than a 44-inch machine?
There actually already is a bigger machine than a 44-inch machine. We got the 11880. It's 64 inches wide.
64, okay.
64 inches wide. That's one of our fine art machines. That's a pretty big puppy.
Yeah, I would say so. You must be talking, what, like 500 milliliters of ink in one of those cartridges? It must be huge.
700, actually.
700.
700 milliliters of ink, yeah.
All right, and here's another question that I couldn't find the answer to on a 2000. Yeah. How many milliliters of ink are in a single cartridge for the 2000?
We don't have that information disclosed. I'm not saying that you can't find it, but we don't have that disclosed. Okay. A good way to put it is that I was mentioning to you earlier that, you know, when I first heard about the R2000 in our development phase, I was like, oh, I need to have that printer, because what we did is we actually added 50% more ink than the R1900. Yep. So the cartridges are at least 50% larger, and that also means we actually did the testing. You'll get at least 50% more prints than the R1900. So a lot more prints. We totally understand that people want to know how much ink it is, but we will tell you that you'll get at least 50% more prints than the previous generation, the R1900 or our 2880 printers.
Okay.
So yeah.
Yeah, very good. Okay. Where was my next question here? Let's talk a little bit about kind of the whole setup. All right. Someone comes home, they decided they want to start printing their own stuff at home, whether it's for professional or whether it's for just consumer use. They want to get the very best prints out of that machine. Don't need to go into a lot of detail, but from your software all the way to the final print, what pieces of the puzzle get the best results? Should they just be using Lightroom, using Photoshop? Talk to me about maybe calibrating screens. Do you think that they really need to be calibrating their printer and then the actual prints? Give me the roadmap.
No problem. So again, we actually also have tips and tricks on how to print both with and without color management on our website. Same video section as I mentioned before. Okay. We try and make this easy for everybody. We really do. We want people to print. Long story short is, let me ask you a question for your question. Do you want a color accurate print or do you want a pretty print?
Well, that depends. For me, that's going to depend on the client.
Exactly. So when I ask that question to customers at trade shows, they usually pause for a second and then they ask me, is it the same thing? I'm like, no, color accurate print is accurate. A pleasing looking print looks pretty. Mm-hmm. So for most people, if you use the automatic mode, either the Epson standard or the Adobe RGB settings in the driver, then match it to the paper type that you use, mm-hmm. you get an amazing looking print sample. Or print. I do this for our framed print samples that we put up at trade shows. Okay. I print with the automatic mode. Most always, unless it has a skin tone, I use the Adobe RGB setting. If it has a skin tone, I generally tend towards the Epson standard. If we're using one of our other papers that we don't have listed in the driver, you can always go to that paper company's website and get their profile. If that's the case, if the paper type isn't listed, then I would use an ICC profile. If somebody has a calibrated screen and trusts what they see on their monitor, they have controlled viewing conditions, and they're also doing highly color specific editing, then the complete color managed workflow where they have a monitor calibrated with a device like the Data Color Spider or the X-Rite color display, sorry, it's X-Rite Color Monkey Display or X-Rite i1 Display Pro 2. Mm-hmm. If you're using one of those devices and you also control the viewing conditions. So this is a big question that I hear a lot. And people are like, it looks a little dark. And I'll do this at trade shows where we have big lighting setups. And I'll hold the print as it comes out of the printer. I'm like, that looks pretty good. And they're like, yeah, it looks all right. Then I put it up against the light. And they're like, wow, that looks totally different. And it's because you control the lighting conditions. What I should probably explain is that ICC profiles and even our internal driver makes assumptions about final lighting conditions.
So it's averaging.
Go ahead.
So it's averaging everything out, right? More or less.
Exactly. Well, we're saying, okay, what is the lighting condition that you will be looking at this under? Otherwise, the math just doesn't work. Mm-hmm. So what we do is we make that same assumption. So if you're not looking at it under that lighting condition, mm-hmm. it's going to look different or dark. So in most cases, I just tell people to either go buy an OttLight or a Solux bulb or something like that to just get you good lighting. Or even they now have these like GE Reveal lights, which are these like kind of bluer or more daylight balanced bulbs. If you mm-hmm. use one of those and you look at your print close to it, you'll probably get a much better looking print. Okay. That being said, I know people are going to look at the snapshots wherever they look at them. So, you know.
Yeah, there's nothing you can do. If it's on the wall, it's on the wall. There's nothing you can do. I do my best to educate people to say, hey, you know, you need to calibrate your screen, and I'm a big stickler on that, calibrating the screen. And people don't realize that your screen is going to look different, you know, at midnight when you don't have any lights on in the room versus at noon when it's bright and sunny outside next to a window. A lot of people don't realize that, and it goes the same for prints.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, that's definitely a big thing. So, software-wise, do you prefer printing with Photoshop or Lightroom?
Yeah, absolutely. I prefer Photoshop actually. Okay. I don't deal with a lot of photos at once. I usually deal with photos one at a time. Mm-hmm. And I don't print massive amounts of photos. So what I find is I'm usually just I look at like a group of photos that I shot, and I'm like, okay, though that's the one I want to work on. That's the piece that I want to print. So I'll work on that one specifically. Just going back for the lighting for one real fast second. If you just turn the brightness down in your monitor too, that will be a great help, because the monitors nowadays that come out, they're so bright. Yeah. They have so much brightness that your monitor compared to your monitor is a light source. Your print is relying on whatever light's reflected off of it. So, but yeah, to your previous question, I prefer Photoshop over Lightroom because I'm not dealing with a lot of files. Okay. My immediate manager, he actually shoots dozens and dozens and dozens of photos, and he uses them for calendars. So he works almost strictly in Lightroom, and he rarely goes into Photoshop because he doesn't have to do a lot of specific editing. He does a lot of global editing in Lightroom. So
okay,
yeah.
Right. What was my next thing I was going to think? Oh, so you're telling me mentioned Adobe RGB. So you'll do you export from Lightroom into Adobe RGB and then print with that image converted over to Adobe RGB?
I don't usually convert. I usually just assign. So if you bring, or if you're working with RAW, or if you just bring the file in, you either want to assign Adobe RGB, or you want to have, most cameras are shooting in Adobe RGB nowadays anyway, or they have that option.
As a JPEG, yes, but there's no color profile on a RAW file.
Exactly. If you're bringing it in as RAW, I am a proponent of bringing it in through Adobe RGB. I know there are folks that prefer ProPhoto RGB. If you do that, then I would suggest converting it from ProPhoto RGB to Adobe RGB. But before you convert it, back up the original file, because converting it actually changes the data in your file. And once that data is changed, it's changed.
It's gone. Yep.
Exactly. That's a destructive image edit.
Okay. So then just to get the next step, you're then printing from. So you're then converted from RAW into Adobe RGB. You're printing from that Adobe RGB file. Then you're going to turn off color management in the print dialog box in Photoshop. That's what you recommend?
Well, it depends on if somebody's doing highly precise color edits, then yes, I would use Photoshop Manager's colors, choose the appropriate ICC profile that matches your paper type, and in this point, at this stage of the game, with all the current operating systems and Photoshop, if you're running at least Photoshop I think CS5 or later, will automatically turn off color management. Okay. In the driver. And once you print it, it will print using a color managed workflow. If you'd like to get a preview of that, you do a soft proof. I think Lightroom automatically soft proofs. I'm not sure. But for Photoshop, that would be View, Proof Setup Custom. You choose the profile there, and then click or check what I call the Make It Look Ugly checkbox, which is Simulate Paper Color and Simulate Black Ink. Which most people don't like to check because it makes it look duller or flatter, but it's actually simulating what the paper will print like. So you really need to do that step. And what some friends of mine actually do, they teach a class on how to, you basically split the image, and you have the original, and then you have the soft-proofed one, and then what you do is you apply adjustment layers to try and get that soft-proof back to the original. So they're a lot better at it than I am, but that's a color-managed workflow. If you just want a pleasing print and you're not doing a lot of color-accurate editing, then instead of choosing Photoshop Manager's colors, I would just use Printer Manager's colors, and I would choose the Adobe RGB setting or the Epson standard setting in the driver. And you'll be surprised. Actually, I'm sure your readers will probably be very surprised at how good those prints look. You should probably try it yourself, too.
Well, I did that. I typically always use the color setting, you know what I mean, the Photoshop Manage or Lightroom Manage, and then turn it off. First print out of the 2000 was right on. Didn't have to play with anything. And the key from what I found is, as long as you're choosing that right profile, that right paper profile, you're probably you're 90%, maybe 95% of the way there. But then that 5% is always either comes down to personal preference or your lighting or those other things. How do you want it to look, or is your lighting so screwed up that it's not making the print look good? You know?
Yeah. In that case, there are some folks that actually would like to make their own ICC profiles, which, you know, if you really want to get that extra 5 to 10% back, a custom profile is really kind of the way to go. And if that's the case, I would actually recommend something like the X-Rite Color Monkey. It's reasonably priced. It's a good little colorimeter or spectrophotometer. It will calibrate your monitor, and it'll also, what's the last thing? Oh, it makes an iterative profile, which is huge. So I know Datacolor also makes a device as well, and I'm sure they all do fairly well. I'm just a little bit partial to that device myself. So
makes sense. Well, let's try and wrap this up. I got one last question. Can you give me any kind of predictions for the future? Where is Epson going? I mean, I know you can't talk in specifics, but what can we see down the road in, say, the next 2 to 5 years, 2 to 4 years out of Epson, and, you know, where are you guys going?
We actually, it's funny, I'm working on a different project right now. We just announced a new t-shirt printer. So we're doing some pretty crazy stuff.
That's interesting. Is it, you know, a local print shop has one. And how can I put this? Is it more like an actual ink that kind of sits on top, or is the ink kind of going into the shirt, or how's it work?
So there's two different ways to talk about that. So one is what we call dye sublimation, where it's a transfer process, and that's on polyester or polyester blends. And that where you actually print on a transfer sheet, and then you heat press and sublimate the ink, or transfer the solid ink into a vapor, and it actually absorbs into the polyester. That's not what this printer is. This printer, you take a t-shirt, you load it on the platen, and it prints directly on the t-shirt, and you heat press to dry the ink. It's pretty amazing. So we're working on some really neat stuff. You know, as I could probably say, is we're always trying to push the envelope as far as photo printing and photo printing technology goes. I mean, obviously, from the R1800 to the R2000, we made some huge leaps and bounds. From the R2880 to the R3000, we really listen to the voice of the customer. So if people contact you and say, hey, can you talk to that Eddie guy from Epson and say, hey, we really want this, we listen to people. And we say, okay, they really want another level of black. They really want orange instead of blue ink. They really want, you know, a really smooth, glossy feel. They really want to be able to not have to switch their photo and matte black inks like the R2000 does. So we listen to that stuff. I mean, the R3000 and the R2000 are directly, their development came directly from feedback from customers and professionals. We actually sat down with our engineers. We visited people in their homes and studios. We had our engineers there. We took pictures. We actually did video. And we asked them, what do you want? Number one response was bigger ink cartridges. We're like, that's easy. So
bigger ink cartridges is always good, because you always hate changing them. Even if they are expensive. I mean, one of the big cartridges for my 7800 are $70 or $80, I think, for, what are they, 200 some milliliters, 220. But you know what? They last forever, and it's so nice to just be able to just buy one every couple months. It really is. Not have to worry about it.
Absolutely. So, I mean, if customers want to get in touch with you, or if you end users want to get in touch with you, they're more than welcome to say, hey, tell that Eddie guy from Epson that we really want to see this. We'll be happy to take that feedback. We love hearing from our editors. We love hearing from the press. We love hearing from end users. And we listen. Obviously, the R3000 and the R2000 are a direct result of that.
Very good. Okay. Well, I really appreciate it, Eddie. Like he said, if there are any questions, please add them. Hopefully, we can get him to maybe comment right on YouTube or right on Google Plus or right on the blog. I'll make sure he has all those links so that maybe he can give us direct feedback and answers right out of the horse's mouth. So, Eddie, thank you very much for joining me. If you would ever like to do another video, please feel free to contact me. For yourself, or heck, maybe even someday the CEO of Epson would like to do an interview, he can contact me too anytime. All right, so thank you very much. I really appreciate it. I think that's it. So thanks everybody. Keep shooting. See ya.